Good evening, and welcome. Tonight, we're diving into what Valkyries do on their days off. Because even the fiercest, soul-choosing shield maidens need a little me time. Before we settle in, what small, strange thing helps you fall asleep? Share it in the comments. It is oddly comforting to hear the little habits that help others drift off. If you enjoy divine drama, ancient magic, and mildly sarcastic storytelling, consider subscribing. Let's begin. You wake up to the sound of wind, not howling, but sighing, like it's just a little tired of itself. Around you, the clouds are soft underfoot, cool and misty, like walking through a refrigerator full of whipped cream. And perched up here in the sky, not on some grand battlefield, but way off the combat grids, the Valkyrie Lodge. Yes, it's real. Yes, it's somehow made of stone and birch bark and a bunch of shield fragments repurposed into really inefficient shingles. And yes, it smells faintly of lavender and singed feather. Inside, the mood is chill. Weirdly chill. Chill you'd expect from a yoga retreat run by a motorcycle gang. A few Valkyries are lounging on fur-covered benches, filing their nails with little rune-etched blades. Another is adjusting the feathers on her armor. Yes, adjusting them like you'd pluck lint off your sweater. Because here's the first great truth. Between the flash and bang of battle, Valkyries get bored. Spectacularly bored. And when you're celestial warrior women waiting for the next Ragnar-Cleavel death wave, self-care becomes survival. Mainstream historical fact. The word Valkyrie comes from Old Norse Valkyrja, meaning chooser of the slain. These were elite figures, half divine, sometimes mortal-born, a lot. Your gently herded Valkyries don't push, but they strongly suggest into a long room where water steams up from deep stone troughs. Some of the tubs are natural hot springs, and in a way, it does. Because between battles, you have time to notice things like blood in your hair, dents in your armor, and the fact that your wings smell like smoke and regret. Quirky tidbit. There's a fringe Norse tale barely more than a footnote about a Valkyrie who refused to bathe for 9 months because she wanted to. Historians disagree on whether this is a satire, a metaphor, or just really solid gossip. One of the Valkyries nearby dips a brush into a wooden bowl and starts cleaning her armor. Gotta scrub it out. And that's when you realize something strange. Despite the serene atmosphere and scented oils, this place doesn't feel relaxing. It feels like a waiting room that someone tried to gentrify. The women here aren't resting, they're maintaining, polishing their edges so they don't crumble. The truth probably lies somewhere, blurry like many things in Norse myth. Half this, half that. The gods love a good contradiction. A clatter draws your attention to the far side of the room. A younger Valkyrie, maybe not fully winged yet, has dropped a bracer. It rolls across the floor with the subtle drama of someone who wanted to make a noise but doesn't want to admit it. She sighs, picks it up, and mutters something about how nothing fits anymore. You know that tone. That's the sound of someone growing out of a purpose. You catch the scent of juniper and cold metal. Somewhere nearby, someone is sharpening a blade that's already sharp. Not because she needs to, but because it keeps her hands busy, keeps her mind from wandering to what happens if the battles stop coming. You walk past an open window. The view is ridiculous. Just sky and stars, and way below, the world spinning slowly, like it's on a giant lazy Susan. You think you spot a forest fire in what might be Denmark, but it's hard to tell from this angle. And near the window, a woman sitting cross-legged, plucking feathers from her own wing and laying them carefully into a shallow basin of water. Each one glows faintly before fading to gray. She sees you watching and says, "Old feathers have memory. Too much of it. They start to weigh you down." You nod, like you totally get what she means. It's just stillness. The kind that presses on your ribs. But it sounds right. Valkyries don't talk much when they're off duty. It's not a rule. It's just that most of them have already said everything they needed to on the battlefield. You catch phrases here, and they're mentions of old loves, of lost swords, of Einherjar, who died stupidly for the 3rd time that week. Someone laughs and says, at least he remembered to die with his boots on this time. The sun never really sets here, just circles the sky lazily like it, too, is waiting for the next plot twist. You lie down on a bench, the wood surprisingly soft, and close your eyes. And in that stillness, you start to understand the rhythm of it all. Battle, rest, clean, sharpen, wait. It's not a glamorous cycle. It's not loud, but it's necessary. Because even divine warriors get grime in their wings. Even God-chosen shield maidens need bath days. And sometimes, the most sacred duty of all is sitting very still, sipping fermented berry juice, and pretending you don't notice that your neighbor has stolen your feather comb. You're starting to settle into the quiet rhythm of the Sky Lodge, somewhere between celestial summer camp and Valhalla's overlooked guest wing, when you realize something. The air here isn't just thick with mist and mead fumes, it's heavy with gossip. Not the petty kind, not exactly. No one's arguing about whose wing shimmered more during the last battle, or who gets the nicer bunk near the window. This is more like high-stakes, myth-flavored speculation. And Ulaki, eavesdropping you, just walked into the Valkyrie version of a break room. They're lounging near the outer ledge of the lodge, a stone terrace hung like a balcony over the swirling clouds below. You can see down to the mortal realm if you squint hard enough, though one Valkyrie sighs and says she's so over Midgard right now. A few are sprawled on fur-covered benches. One's perched like a vulture on the stone railing, absently braiding and unbraiding her own hair. Another sharpens a dagger against the side of her boot, not even looking down, and they're talking, not shouting, not whispering. That calm, pointed tone people use when they pretend they're just sharing information, but really, they're narrating live-action soap operas. Eirik the Red's third son, the one with the limp, one says, flicking a crumb off her lap. He's fighting again, even after that sword through the kidney thing. You think this is the one. Another shrugs. He always dies dramatically, but he never gets chosen. Odin says he's got bad instincts, keeps fighting on the wrong side. Quirky tidbit. There's a fringe Icelandic folktale, claiming that Valkyries held contests to predict who would die with the most flair. Points awarded for blood arcs, heroic speeches, or creative falling positions. The loser had to polish every mead cup in Valhalla for a month. Totally unverifiable, but oddly specific. This isn't boredom. You realize it's a sport. Speculation as entertainment. Battle hasn't started yet, but the pre-show commentary is already rolling. One Valkyrie leans in. You remember Brynja, right? She picked that berserker who screamed at his own horse. Collective groan, she said. His death made up for it. Decapitated himself, trying to block a spear. One of the Einherjar actually clapped. You'd think this would be grim. And, yeah, there's a morbid undercurrent. Valkyries are talking about human death like it's a reality show elimination round. But it's also, weirdly, routine. There's no cruelty in it, just distance. That's what you notice most, how detached they are, like nurses swapping emergency room stories. They're not cruel, just chronically exposed to endings. You wander a little farther down the terrace, where a few younger Valkyries are doing what can only be described as restless sky pacing. One is pretending not to stare at a glowing patch of mist that probably marks a brewing skirmish below. Another is mumbling to herself, rehearsing names, titles, bloodlines keeping, her chooser skills, sharp, maybe. Mainstream historical fact. In Norse poetry, Valkyries were often described as attending battle, not only to guide souls, but to influence the outcome itself. They chose not just the dead, but the victorious. This dual role made them not just fate's messengers, but its enforcers. You sit down next to one of the pacing Valkyries. She glances at you, eyes tired. They act like the choosing is easy, she mutters. Like we're just plucking flowers. But what if they don't want to go? You nod, again pretending you understand. Maybe you kind of do. Historians still argue whether Valkyries had true autonomy. She continues, absently. Were they executing Odin's will? Or was the choice actually theirs? You try to picture the battlefield from above, Valkyries swooping down, weapons glowing, eyes blank or blazing. Then picture them here, later, arguing over who made the better call. It's not just gossip, it's processing. Some of them pretend not to care, she says, her voice quieter. But you can tea-pick a dying man's soul out of his chest and not care, even if you're just following orders. A breeze picks up, smelling faintly of frost and ozone. The air gets clearer for a moment. Below, you spot movement soldiers gathering, a campfire, maybe a beginning or an end. Valkyries lean forward subtly, like cats watching birds. Then just as quickly, the fog rolls back in. Still waiting, one of the older Valkyries walks past, carrying a goblet so large it's probably been mistaken for a cauldron at some point. She smirks at the younger one beside you and says, "You'll burn out if you try to feel them all. Better to pick favorites." "That's not how fate works," the younger says stiffly. The older one winks. "You sure?" You watch them disappear into the steam of the lodge. Back near the ledge, the conversation has shifted. Now they're speculating on which mortal poets are going to ruin their reputations next. Someone brings up a guy who tried to describe Valkyrie flight as like 1,000 screaming geese. There is audible offense. Someone throws a pillow. Another Valkyrie grins. Well, he did get trampled by his own ox cart, so maybe fate had notes. The clouds darken a little. A distant thundercrack rolls through the sky, like someone dragging a chair across a marble floor. You think it might be time soon, but not yet. And so they return to talking, whispering, waiting. It's strange to think these beings gilded and winged, weapon-bearing and fate-guided are, at their core, just a little restless, a little nosy, maybe even lonely. You imagine what it must be like to exist in the pause, to watch lives play out and end again and again, while you drink mead and debate whether the king's nephew has more flair for dying than his cousin, to be caught in the longest halftime show in mythic history. You stand up, stretch, and someone hands you a warm roll filled with something that tastes suspiciously like smoked eel and pickled pear. It's weirdly good, a small comfort, maybe, in the long intermission between wars. You wander deeper into the lodge. The architecture up here is kind of confusing, part longhouse, part spa, part armory, part celestial Airbnb that forgot it needed walls in some places. Everything's infused with that mid-tier divine design style, grand and ancient, but vaguely underfunded. In a tucked-away chamber behind a half-draped tapestry, you find something unexpected, a training hall. Now, you might be thinking swords, spears, duels, blood spatters, classic epic stuff. But nope, this is quiet, focused, more ballet than battlefield. A group of Valkyries is moving in slow, synchronized formations across a smooth, rune-scribed floor. No music, just the faint shff of boot soles and the occasional grunt of exertion. And here's the surprise. This isn't weapon training, it's flight drills. You pause at the edge of the room, half hidden by a shield hung like a curtain. The Valkyries glide, twist, dip low, then launch into clean vertical arcs, not lifting off entirely, just enough to test the air. Their wings shimmer faintly with effort. You can tell they're not showing off, they're refining muscle memory. Because, here's the thing, flying's not just instinct, it's skill. And between battles, skill rusts. Mainstream historical fact, Norse sources often describe Valkyries as swan maidens who could dan feather cloaks to fly between worlds. Scholars trace this image back to broader Indo-European birdwoman myths, possibly rooted in shamanic rituals. Basically, before Valkyries were warriors, they were bird witches with a flair for soul. One trainee falters, her right wing twitches out of sync and she winces. A stern older Valkyrie taps a nearby staff against the floor. No scolding, just correction. The young one nods and resets her stance. You didn't expect to find discipline here. Routine, yes, bathing, gossip, maybe some dramatic sighing while staring out into the void. But this is work. The Valkyrie beside you notices your curious look and shrugs. Everyone thinks we're just divine Uber drivers for the glorious dead. But if you botch a mid-air soul grab, you don't just lose a hero, you screw up fate. She gestures toward the room with her chin. Between battles, we train. Because if you don't stretch the wings, they stop listening. You nod solemnly, pretending you understand the pain of uncooperative celestial limbs. Another group lines up for a relay, lightning-fast sprints across the hall, followed by sudden, suspended wing hover holds. It's brutal. You can see the strain in their shoulders. One collapses into a heap of feathers and curses under her breath in what might be Old Norse profanity. Or maybe just frustration with gravity. Quirky tidbit: a strange 14th century Norwegian charm describes how to borrow a Valkyrie's feather cloak by tricking her into dropping it during flight drills. The supposed prize: a single question answered truthfully. The catch: if she catches you, your eyebrows fall out for a year. Magical law is weirdly specific. You slip farther into the hall, watching the drills evolve. Now, they're practicing portal entry formations. Yes, portal entry formations. Apparently, there's a right and wrong way to zip between realms. Show up too fast, and you shatter the time seams. Show up too slow, and the soul might have already been snatched by some underworld rival. Historians still argue whether Valkyries operated across realms or only in battlefields already touched by Odin's will. A nearby observer murmurs. The borderlines between Valhalla, Hell, and Midgard were never exactly clear. You try to imagine flying full speed through a reality fissure, feathers on fire, clutching a dying berserker, and shouting, "Left at Niflheim, then hard turn past the fjord." It doesn't sound dignified. But up here, you realize, dignity is secondary to precision. The lead Valkyrie, clearly some kind of flight captain, claps her hands, and the drill winds down. Sweat glistens on brow ridges, wings droop. One of the younger ones mutters, "My scapula is trying to revolt." Someone tosses her a bottle of something glowing green. She drinks deeply, belches softly, and sighs. Tastes like pickled lightning, better. There's camaraderie here. Not the loud, chest-thumping kind, but a shared understanding, like ballerinas after rehearsal, or pit crew members after a clean tire change. These are warriors between wars, but they're still practicing the dance. You find a bench in the corner, next to a small altar, covered in feathers, stones, and a single half-burned candle. The scent is pine, resin, and metal polish, a humble offering, maybe, to the god of not messing up in mid-air. You rest your head back and listen to the gentle shuffling of wings, the murmur of breath returning to normal. The room settles into a low hum, and it strikes you, this is their version of prayer. Not hymns, not silence, just motion. In a way, that's how they worship the fate they serve, by staying sharp even when no one's watching. The sun swings past the upper windows, casting long gold shadows across the floor. One of the Valkyries walks past you and says, "You should stretch." We all do, even if you're grounded. You nod and awkwardly lift one leg like a confused heron. She raises an eyebrow and mutters, "Maybe just watch for now." Fair. A bell somewhere in the lodge rings 3 tones, low and resonant. Practice is done. The Valkyries disperse, wings tucked in, shoulders rolling like boxers, after a round. But before they vanish into the mist again, one of them turns, looks at you, and says, "Remember, battle is the performance. This is the rehearsal, and bad rehearsal, bad ending." Then she disappears through a door that looks like it leads to nowhere, because, of course it does. You sit alone for a moment longer, surrounded by the faint scent of sweat and storm, realizing that behind every mythic moment, the flashing wings, the swooping rescues, there's this daily practice, quiet repetition. The grind behind the glory. You ease out of the now empty training hall, legs a little stiff from your one-legged heron stretch attempt. The corridor outside winds lazily upward, its stones humming with warmth, probably geothermal, or, divine plumbing. Either way, your steps are muffled as you follow the scent of something rich, salty, and sizzling. Up ahead, the lodge kitchen. You figured mead would be served out of skulls and wild boar would be roasted on spears. But what you find looks more like a rustic, slightly chaotic test kitchen from an eternal Nordic cooking show. There's a long stone counter piled with ingredients, some you recognize, others not so much. Burner, or the jar labeled stag's breath. A Valkyrie in an apron is currently deep in an argument with a sour-faced companion over whether goat cheese pairs better with pine, ash, or reindeer marrow. You learn two things very quickly. First, Valkyries take food seriously. Second, they have a lot of time between battles to get creative. A few of them notice you hovering and wave you in. One hands you a bowl of something warm and suspiciously orange. You sip cautiously. It tastes like spiced fog and regret. Not bad, actually. Historians still argue whether Valkyries cooked for themselves or were served in Valhalla. One of them says casually, dropping a whole trout into a sizzling pan of what might be dragon oil. But we know the Einherjar got nightly feasts. Someone had to make them. Mainstream historical fact. The Norse sagas describe Heyrin, a magical goat in Valhalla, whose udder produced an endless stream of mead. Every night, warriors feast. Every morning, they rise uninjured to fight again. But no one ever says who grills the meat. Suspicious, right? So it turns out, between choosing the dead and swooping around battlefields, Valkyries do something almost disturbingly mundane. They cook. And not just out of necessity. No, this is passion, creativity, and also, sometimes, passive-aggressive potlucks. You find out there are unofficial signature dishes. One, Valkyrie makes something called funeral stew, which contains 15 types of root vegetables and allegedly makes you weep even if you're not dead. There's also someone who only does fermented things and once made a yogurt that may have achieved sentience. A nearby pantry is stocked like a potion master's daydream jars of cloudberries, dried seal meat, volcanic salt, dried seaweed infused with aurora essence, and one container labeled simply, "Don't." You do not press the issue. Quirky tidbit. An obscure bit of 13th century German folklore suggests that Valkyries invented mustard. Apparently, one descended during a harvest and mixed crushed seeds with vinegar and mead to surprise a lovesick mortal chef. The sauce outlived the romance. As the room heats up with laughter and flame, you realize this kitchen is their therapy. It's where they put down their weapons and pick up ladles, stirring the silence into something edible. You know, one murmurs, as she whisks a bowl of something frothy and iridescent. Picking the dead makes you think a lot about life. What people reach for before they go, what they regret, what they taste last. You swallow, suddenly aware of how quiet the air has gone. Even the sizzle fades. Historians still argue whether Valkyries felt empathy for the dying, she says, eyes fixed on the bowl. But it's hard not to, after a few thousand. There's a long pause. She spoons the mixture into tiny ceramic cups and sets them on a tray. Dessert, she offers. It tastes like starlight and honey, and something faintly metallic maybe. Iron, maybe memory. Either way, it's oddly comforting. You help carry dishes to a long wooden table in the next room, where a few off-duty Valkyries have gathered for what might be the quietest, most efficient communal dinner you've ever seen. No one talks over each other. No one scrolls through a divine version of Instagram. Just steam rising from bowls, and the occasional clink of a wooden spoon. Someone passes you a plate of dense dark bread that smells like smoke and seaweed. You eat slowly, chewing through silence and stories. No one says it, but you get the sense that food here isn't just Fuild's ritual. A gentle rebellion against the violence that defines their existence. There's a moment, mid-meal, when the thunder outside breaks again. It rumbles across the sky like the sound of a battlefield drum warming up. Every Valkyrie stiffens. One lifts her hand halfway, as if to reach for a spear that isn't there. But the rumble fades. The world holds its breath, and they go back to eating. You sit there, feeling the tension dissolve like bone marrow into broth. To train and wait and cook and joke, knowing that the next battle is always coming but never quite now. It's like being an actor whose cue is always a second away. So you fill the silence with flavor. After dinner, the Valkyries clean in practiced silence. You offer to help, and they actually let you. You find yourself drying a pan that may or may not have been used by Thor himself, judging by its scorch marks. When the last dish is stacked, one of them hands you a pouch of dried herb cakes for later, and you pocket it like it's a sacred relic. It probably is. Before you leave, someone says, "Next time you taste something incredible in a dream, thank a Valkyrie." You nod and step out again into the lodge's misty halls. Your belly full, your head spinning gently. You head toward the next thing, whatever these strange, grounded angels do after they've fed the future. The halls of the lodge darken as you wander further from the kitchen, the golden twilight now shifting into a kind of ambient dusk, not the ominous kind, just the eternal soft dim of a place that isn't really tethered to time. Your stomach is still warm from root stew and celestial starlight pudding, and you're starting to understand. Between battles, the Valkyries build a life made of quiet rituals, and one of the strangest, boredom. You find them next in what can only be described as the celestial equivalent of a common room, or maybe an interdimensional rec center. There are mossy couches, scattered weapons no one seems to be using, and at least one beanbag that appears to be made of frost giant fur. Valkyries are draped across the furniture in various poses of divine laziness. One is reading. One is sharpening her blade while upside down on a bench. Another is braiding someone else's hair while humming a tune that suspiciously sounds like the opening of a Bjork song. They look bored, not dramatically, not the existential, angsty kind of boredom that leads to brooding monologues and candlelit poetry about fate. This is that slow, in-between boredom. The boredom of people who've already reorganized their weapons 3 times, cleaned the feathers on their armor with a special rag from Vanaheim, and now can't decide whether to take a nap or try interpretive shadow puppets on the ceiling again. You plop onto the edge of a bench and ask genuinely what they do between all the sacred duties and supernatural flight drills. The nearest Valkyrie groans and stretches like a cat that's lived through 10 apocalypses. "We wait," she mutters. "That's the secret. That's the whole thing. Between the glory, we just wait." Mainstream historical fact. Though Valkyries are mostly seen as mythological, they may have been inspired by actual historical figures, leech shield maidens, or female ritual leaders buried with weapons and wealth. Some graves across Scandinavia support the theory, though interpretation remains hotly debated. One of the others adds, "The waiting's the worst. Not because we're impatient, it's because we know what's coming." You ask if they can sense it's the next battle, the next war. A shrug, sometimes, like a storm in your teeth. But Odin likes surprises, keeps us from getting cocky. Another Valkyrie throws a runestone into the air. It spins lazily, lands on her palm, then bounces off and disappears into the fur of the giant beanbag. No one moves to retrieve it. "We take bets sometimes," she says. "How long before the next horn blows? How many warriors will lose? Who gets stuck guiding the really dramatic ones?" Someone groans. "Ugh, last month I had to collect this one guy who insisted on reciting his own saga before he died. Took him 20 minutes. They all laugh, gently, like people laughing at their own shared weird job. Quirky tidbit. A fringe Icelandic folktale claims Valkyries once tried to create their own board game to pass the time. It involved dice made of troll teeth and a game board stitched from fallen warrior banners. It was eventually banned when someone lost and accidentally summoned a blizzard. You notice, in a far corner, a Valkyrie playing a stringed instrument. The music's soft-plucked rather than strummed. It's more atmospheric than melodic. The notes shimmer in the air like heat rising off a sword. She's not performing, she's just playing, filling the silence. You sit there a while, letting the boredom settle in. It's not unpleasant, more like the low tide of divine existence. You realize boredom here isn't failure, it's a feature. A safety valve for souls, expected to swoop and choose, and sometimes carry people away from their own guts mid-battle. You need the lull, or you snap. Historians still argue whether Valkyries were ever allowed to live among mortals between their duties. One murmurs, tossing another runestone into the air. Some stories say yes, others say the world couldn't hold them, and maybe that's why boredom becomes their rebellion. Mortals waste time. Gods are supposed to fill it with meaning, but here they are, lounging, joking, sighing over nothing in particular, letting the minutes expand. One Valkyrie gestures at a stack of scrolls beside her. Tried reading all of these last century, got to scroll 8 before I realized they were all about tax disputes in Alfheim. Who writes that down? Another one perks up. Hey, don't knock the Alfheim audits. Those elves are petty. The laughter is real. Dry, yes, slightly unhinged, maybe, but very, very real. One of them suggests a game. Not the Trolltooth board game, mercifully, but something involving guessing obscure warrior deaths based on cryptic clues. You join in. Turns out, you're weirdly good at this. Arrow to the left shin, you ask. Nope. Eel bite to the neck. Viking bachelor party. Long story. You laugh so hard, you snort. A few of them glance over, surprised, then pleased. You fit in a little. Enough. Time passes in the strange, unmarked way it does in dreams. Someone braids your hair. Someone else lets you paint a rune on their shoulder with powdered frostflower pigment. Another offers to read your fate off your fingernails, then shrugs and says, meh, too many hangnails. Eventually, the boredom deepens into stillness. No one talks. A few Valkyries lie down, not quite asleep, just paused. And you realize something important between the battles and the rituals and the divine feast prep. This is the core of Valkyrie existence, a kind of meditative idleness, not laziness, not apathy, just a sacred version of killing time. They're not waiting for action, they're waiting for purpose. And purpose is not something you can summon on demand. It arrives like a storm or a hornor, a dying breath. Until then, you pass the time. You stretch your legs and shuffle deeper into the lodge, past the rooms where boredom curls like mist over the furniture, past the kitchen where flavors defy explanation, past the quiet hum of stringed instruments and rune games. You're looking for something else now. Rest, not food, not idle chatter, something with more motion, more risk. What you find is a long corridor carved with spirals. It feels older than the rest, older than memory. You follow it instinctively, as though your feet already know where they're going, until it opens into a chamber lit with soft blue flames. The air smells like cedar smoke and storm-wet stone. Here, the Valkyries keep their private rituals. One of them waits by a pool, so still it reflects not just the room, but the idea of the room, like a memory that never happened. She doesn't speak. She just gestures for you to sit. This is not for the Einherjar. This is not for Odin. This is for them. Mainstream historical fact. In Norse mythology, seer was a form of sorcery practiced for insight, shaping fate, and interacting with unseen forces. Though often associated with goddesses like Freya, there are hints that Valkyries beings, intimately tied to Fate also, practiced these arts in their downtime. Here, between battles, the Valkyries seek out visions, not because they're commanded to, because they need to. Choosing who lives and dies isn't a checklist, it's a burden. And the only way to carry it is to glimpse what might lie beyond. You watch as one of them closes her eyes and hums, not a tune, exactly, more like a vibration. Another scatters crushed bones and flower petals into the water, and the pool shivers. Then you see images, faint, shifting. A child crying over a broken blade, a battlefield soaked in fog, a dragon gnawing on the roots of a tree that looks suspiciously like the one you passed earlier near the kitchen. A third Valkyrie leans in and begins whispering something under her breaths, sounds that twist your brain in knots. You're not sure if it's Old Norse or just raw meaning poured into syllables. Either way, your pulse syncs with it. Historians still argue whether Valkyries actually shaped fate or merely followed it. One of them murmurs when she sees you staring. But down here, we ask, what's the difference? And suddenly, that feels like the most important question in the world. The chamber is full of tools for these rituals, wands of yew and ash, strands of woven hair knotted with secrets, feathers that glow faintly in the dark. One Valkyrie is etching runes onto the inside of her own palm. You flinch, it'll fade, she says softly. Eventually, another is inscribing symbols into the walls with chalk made of frost. You realize the entire chamber is covered in stories you'll never finish reading. One rune glows faintly as you pass. It means doubt. There are candles that never melt, mirrors that reflect people who aren't there, and a small bowl filled with what looks like tears suspended in oil. You don't ask. You don't need to. Quirky tidbit. Some later folk traditions claim that if you stare into a Valkyrie's mirror on Midsummer's Eve, you'll see the face of the person who'll one day choose your fate. This led to a brief but intense 18th century trend in rural Denmark, involving mirror and herbal eye drops. The results were mixed. You sit by the pool and watch as the visions fade, replaced by ripples, then stillness. A Valkyrie beside you exhales like she just let go of a decade. We don't just pick the dead, she says quietly. We carry their futures, too. We see where they would have gone, what they might have changed, what the world loses when they fall. You blink. That's heavier than a feathered helmet. You ask if it ever gets easier. She smiles without humor. No, but we get better at pretending. A few of them chuckle, low and weary. One mentions the time she tried to cast a love spell on a mortal and accidentally made an entire village fall in love with a goat. He still writes, she adds with a straight face. Laughter rolls gently through the chamber. Even here, in this sacred space of fate and sorrow, they find room for absurdity. Because if you don't laugh while staring into the abyss starts critiquing your posture. A moment later, a Valkyrie lights a small lantern and leads you toward a quieter corner of the room. Here, there's a large slab of stone covered in carvings, and at its center, a single feather block, polished, almost obsidian in sheen. This, she says softly, is from when we first fell. You freeze. Wait, fell. We weren't always like this, she continues. Some of us used to walk freely among mortals, until we chose too much, loved too hard, changed too many outcomes. You run your fingers near the feather but don't touch. It seems heavy, metaphysically speaking. Historians still argue whether the stories of fallen Valkyries were moral warnings or hidden truths. But the sagas are full of winged women who gave up the sky for love. You ask if she regrets it. She doesn't answer right away, just watches the flickering lantern light dance across the stone. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she says, some days, the ritual ends not with a ceremony, but with a sigh. The Valkyries gather their tools, erase their chalk, dry their palms, the runes fade, the visions curl into smoke. One by one, they exit the chamber, nodding to you, already lost in thought. You're the last to leave. As you pass the pool, you glance down one last time, manned for just a moment. You see yourself, but not quite. The face is older, wiser, maybe sadder, maybe not. You blink, and the water goes still. You step back into the hallway, changed. You've seen what they carry. And it's not just spears and destinies. It's grief, memory, a deep yearning for the lives they touch but never truly live. And somewhere, tucked behind the sharp angles and winged helmets, there's something almost human, almost. You emerge from the spiral corridor into something that might be a garden, if gardens could float. The air feels thick and tinged with honey, golden light pouring from nowhere in particular. Petals drift sideways, and nothing quite obeys gravity. Certainly not the flock of birds winging by upside down like they've just invented a new direction. A Valkyrie waves you over from beneath an impossibly tall ash tree, its roots braided like dreadlocks, its leaves whispering in a language that's not meant for ears. She's not armored, no winged helm, just loose robes and bare feet. You almost don't recognize her until she smirks. Thought you might like a break from the moody fate stuff, she says, tossing you a peach that tastes more like sunlight than fruit. Come on, I'll show you what else we do. Because yes, when they're not choosing the slain or deciphering ripples in the soul pool, Valkyries do have hobbies. Weird, beautiful, oddly relaxing hobbies. Mainstream historical fact. Archaeological digs have uncovered Norse art and domestic tools, suggesting that even warrior cultures placed a high value on craftsmanship. Embroidery, music, poetry, and storytelling were deeply integrated into daily life. One Valkyrie is painting, but not on canvas on mist. With each brushstroke, a shape hovers in the air. A stag outlined in blues, then a storm, then a laughing face that melts into flower petals. Another Valkyrie walks through the shapes, letting them cling to her like perfume before they vanish. Therapy, one of them shrugs. In another corner, 3 of them are making perfume. Not the mortal kind. These blends are designed to evoke entire emotions: nostalgia, triumph, longing. One small vial is labeled simply regret. You sniff a bottle marked first snow, and suddenly remember a winter you've never lived. Too strong, a Valkyrie asks, gently laughing. That one's got a bit of Jotun breath in it. We were experimenting. Quirky tidbit. According to one fringe poem found in a damaged saga manuscript, Valkyries once held a perfume-making contest judged by Thor. The winning scent was supposedly pine, rain, and dragon panic. Thor was said to sneeze so hard he shattered a table. You pass a grove where music hums without instruments, just the trees, rustling rhythmically, synced to the heartbeat of the one Valkyrie lying beneath them, humming softly. She's tuning the forest, or maybe it's tuning her. And in the center of this dreamlike zone is the storytelling ring. No chairs, no fire, just a patch of soft moss where Valkyries take turns weaving tales not just of battles, but of small things, of heartbreaks that never made it into the sagas, of dreams lost in translation, of warriors who wept in secret but still fought anyway. You sit and listen. One Valkyrie tells the story of a shield maiden who fell in love with a berserker but couldn't admit it until it was too late. The moss around you pulses with red and gold as she speaks, as if the earth itself is reacting. Another tells the tale of a sea king who built ships for people he knew would never return, because he couldn't bear to watch them wait for someone else. You start to notice the common thread. These stories aren't just to pass the time. They're how Valkyries remember the details, the fleeting human things that don't make it into runes or rituals. Historians still argue whether these narrative traditions were passed down orally by the Valkyrie myth, or whether they emerged later through poetic embellishment. One says, rolling a pebble between her fingers. But we know which parts matter, and you believe her, because it's all so raw, so strangely delicate. A Valkyrie with silver-tipped fingers sits beside you and starts braiding a cord made of thread so fine it almost dissolves in the light. You realize each thread is from something else: a strand of hair, a wisp of cloud, a scrap of battlefield tunic. We make memory ropes, she says. Tangle them when we miss someone. Untangle them when we're ready to let go. You stare at your hands and wonder what yours would look like. Someone starts a game in the corner, an improvisational contest, where you have to make a poem on the spot, using only the words mead, bones, and wind. You try, you fail, they cheer anyway. You feel a little victorious, a little embarrassed, very warm. Eventually, the floating garden begins to shimmer. The birds have looped back around, now doing figure eights through the petals, leaving trails of stardust behind. The ash tree rustles again. They're calling practice. Someone murmurs. The mood shifts, subtle but real, not tense, just focused. The stories end. The perfumes are capped. The memory ropes are folded into satchels. One by one, they stand and stretch and flex. They are, after all, still Valkyries. But before they go, one leans toward you and whispers, "It's not about how we die, or even how we choose. It's what we notice while we wait." And then she's gone, off toward the distant echo of training bells. You're left sitting in the soft moss, realizing something strange. You don't want to leave the garden. You want to stay here, making pretend perfumes and badly rhymed poetry, and listening to stories that won't save the world, but make it gentler. You feel your fingers twitch, as if reaching for your own thread, You wonder what your memory rope would remember. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and follow the faint metallic hum that echoes through the air like thunder biting its tongue. It's time for practice, not the dreamy, rune-filled kind you saw in the pool chamber, but the bone and blister kind. Swordplay, aerial maneuvering, shield formations, and something that might technically be called synchronized skyjump. This is Valkyrie Boot Camp, except no one's shouting, and no one's wearing matching shirts. Instead, you're greeted by a thunderclap, followed by a Valkyrie, casually backflipping off a floating boulder, and landing blade first into a bullseye painted on an actual cloud. Practice is not optional, it's an art form, one honed over centuries. And the Valkyries treat it the way mortals treat espresso: mandatory, ritualistic, occasionally terrifying. Mainstream historical fact: Norse warriors trained relentlessly, not just in combat, but in coordinated formations and symbolic rituals. Shields and axes weren't just weapons, they were expressions of identity and tribe. A Valkyrie tosses you a practice spear. It's heavier than you expect, also possibly humming. "Don't worry," she grins, "it only bites when it's bored." You decline politely and take a seat on a nearby floating rock. Observation is more your speed right now. Below, a sparring circle forms. Two Valkyries circle each other, shields low, swords drawn. There's no growling or taunting, just a quiet, razor-sharp focus. Each movement is poetry dipped in adrenaline. Then they clash. The sound is like two glaciers, high-fiving. It's beautiful, brutal, precise. Another pair takes to the air, wings slicing through the breeze as they weave patterns of feints and loops. You're not sure whether this is combat or ballet. Either way, it's mesmerizing. Historians still argue whether Valkyries had actual wings, or if those were symbolic representations of divine speed and omnipresence. A nearby Valkyrie notes while adjusting her gauntlets. "Personally, I say both, because why not?" Quirky tidbit: one obscure Icelandic folktale claims Valkyries practiced mid-air dueling atop migrating whales. Most scholars roll their eyes, but a few point out there are carvings suggesting airborne figures and suspiciously airborne marine mammals. You watch as three Valkyries play a game called shield tag. It's basically high-stakes dodgeball, except with metal discs moving faster than common sense. One of them vaults off a column of mist, deflects two incoming shields, and tags a teammate using only the hilt of her dagger. You're told they do this for fun, but it's not all flair and flips. There's slow work, two grinding the edge of a sword until it sings, restringing a bow with thread soaked in ash, an intent wrapping wrists before a spar so bones don't crack. Some Valkyries train solo, repeating the same move until it's less action and more instinct. One stands under a waterfall made of light, slicing through phantoms that appear only long enough to vanish with a whisper. She's been doing this for hours. When you ask why, she replies, "Because one day it won't be a phantom." It strikes you that battle for the Valkyries isn't just about killing or glory. It's about readiness, constant, sacred readiness. You don't get to choose the fallen if you can't walk among them. You don't earn the right to whisper fate unless your blade has tasted its edge. And there's something calming about that. The rhythm of sharpening, the elegance of preparation. No chaos, just repetition, precision. A kind of divine choreography. One Valkyrie is teaching a younger one to throw a spear that arcs mid-air. They use rings of fire as targets. When the student finally hits the center, the older one nods. No words, just a hand on her shoulder. You sit with that moment. How quiet excellence can be. Someone calls a break, and just like that, the noise softens. The air smells like ozone and leather. A few Valkyries wipe down their blades. Others sipped from flasks filled with something smoky and suspiciously green. You're handed a cup. It tastes like courage and regret. "So," says a Valkyrie, lounging beside you, her spear across her lap, "what did you think?" You say something polite about discipline and power. She snorts. "Please, we train like this because it stops us from thinking too hard about the ones we couldn't save." about the ones we chose too soon. Another Valkyrie joins her, rolling her eyes. Oh no, are we trauma bonding again? Yes, the first one says cheerfully. Wanna spar about it? You realize this play fighting, this dark-humored banter, it's part of the training too. The laughter is as sharp as the blades, and maybe just as important. Later, they show you a different kind of practice. Memory drills, not for their sake, for the dead. Every warrior, a Valkyrie, lifts from the battlefield, leaves behind details, scents, songs, family names. The Valkyries recite them, out loud, over and over, kind of oral spell, to preserve what time will erase. You hear one recite the name of a girl who died with a flute in her hand. Another speaks of a boy who never raised his sword, only his shield, and still earned a place in Valhalla. Practice isn't just for us, one Valkyrie says, gently tying her hair back into a braid that looks like a chain of thorns. It's for them, so they're not forgotten. There's a long silence, not awkward, just full. Then someone sneezes, mid-flip, and crashes into a cloud. You grin. Somehow, even training has bloopers. As the session winds down, you notice that some Valkyries are bruised, winded, sweating, and they're glowing with it, not in the magic sense, in the we earned this pain kind of way. One leans on her sword and sighs. All this for a job where you never hear thank you. Another grins. That's why we train, because they'll never understand, but we do. And that's it, isn't it? They're not waiting for praise, not even recognition. They prepare because it matters, because the work means something. You rise from your perch, the practice spear, still humming gently in your hands. You set it down. It hums one last note and goes quiet. As you turn to leave the training grounds, a Valkyrie calls after you. Next time you're sparring, you laugh, but your muscles twitch in agreement. Maybe next time. You step through another whispered-in doorway, less a portal, more a shifting pause in the air. And suddenly, you're somewhere very bureaucratic. Not what you expect from the afterlife's elite warrior squad. But here they are, Valkyries at long desks made of petrified starlight, quills moving without hands, scrolls unrolling like lazy serpents. This is the records hall. Even gods need paperwork, someone says dryly, sliding a ledger the size of a mattress across a glowing desk. We call this part the quiet fight. You're almost disappointed. Where are the swords, the soaring battle cries, the fiery training routines? But then you look closer and realize this is where decisions truly happen. Not on fields of flame, but here, among names and symbols and choices so delicate they might snap under thought. Mainstream historical fact. The Norse concept of word, roughly translated as fate or personal destiny, wasn't just about grand endings. It was written in layers, believed to be woven and recorded by Norns or divine figures. Valkyries, as fate choosers, were often conflated with these roles. In the back of the hall, a wall stretches up into shadow, carved with names. You can't read them. They shimmer like breath on glass. Some are fading. Some are being added as you watch. One Valkyrie sighs. We don't just pick the fallen. We have to account for them. A scroll gently floats down beside you, its script curling and alive. It's a battle report, not of tactics or weather, but emotion. How a warrior felt in his last heartbeat, whether he doubted, whether he prayed, whether he forgave. You read a few lines, chose love instead of vengeance, entered battle unarmed, sang a lullaby to himself. It's a lot. Valkyries read these all day, not just for cataloging, but for ethical review. Because the question isn't just who dies, but why. And more than that, what becomes of their death. Historians still argue whether Valkyries were passive agents of fate, or if they exercised personal judgment. One explains while filing runes into a crystalline drawer. We say both, but we don't argue. We just remember. You walk further down the hall and spot a corner filled with mismatched trinkets. Tiny, worn-down bits, buttons, lockets, smoothed stones, and a half-burned love letter. What is this? A Valkyrie glances up. Things left behind. Sometimes a name isn't enough. They call this the tangible ledger. Not every death can be honored with song, but sometimes a pocket stone is enough to keep a soul's echo from dissolving. Quirky tidbit. In one rare saga fragment, there's mention of a Valkyrie named Yrsa who refused to let go of a mortal's necklace for over 300 years, claiming it still whispered his last wish and looked really good with her armor. The scholarly community remains baffled. You sit at a desk and try writing a record. It's harder than it looks. Every phrase seems either too cold or too poetic. You scratch out 3 drafts before a Valkyrie gently takes the quill and finishes it for you, eyes soft. There, she says. He mattered. Now it's written. The walls begin to glow. That means an incoming pulse. Someone else has just fallen. Time slows. A hush settles. The Valkyries gather. This part you've seen before, but not like this. The process of choosing. You thought it happened in the moment of death, but that's only half the story. Now you watch as they examine the threads. Not literal threads, though one Valkyrie does carry a ball of silver string she mutters to constantly, more like emotional tracings, currents, ripples left behind. One warrior saved a child, but doomed a village. Another gave up command to protect his sister. One died screaming at the sky. Another smiled, bleeding, saying, "Tell them I tried." The Valkyries whisper, debate. They are not judges, they are not cold, but they are decisive. One name is plucked, a feather is pressed to a rune. Somewhere, a soul lifts, another is paused, sent elsewhere. You ask what that means. The answer, not everyone's ready. Some need silence first. It's both chilling and weirdly comforting. You're offered a glimpse of your own ledger. It's blank. You haven't earned your ending yet, a Valkyrie says, amused, which is fair. You drift toward another part of the hall. The grievances niche here. The Valkyries file things they remember not from warriors, but from themselves. Failed choices, names that haunt them, places they visited too late. Even we have regrets, one admits, gently placing a golden bead into a bowl. We're divine, not perfect. And there's power in admitting that, in keeping a space for what they couldn't do. Some Valkyries leave poems, some leave bits of shattered blade, some just sit silently, letting the weight move through them. You ask if this ever becomes too much. "Oh yes," one says brightly, setting a scroll ablaze. "That's why we get spa days." You blink, you get what now? She nods. Celestial mud masks, wing steamers, and, occasionally, existential scream therapy. You don't know whether she's joking. You decide not to ask. Because this is what no one talks about. The in-between, not war, not glory, just the work, the effort, the remembering, the accounting. And you realize it's sacred in its own way. There's a quiet nobility in the ledger. A stillness that holds up the storm. One Valkyrie hands you a candle. "For the ones you'd like to remember," she says. You light it, no name, just feeling. It flickers gently, then joins the 1,000 others in the air. A constellation of memory, burning slow. The flicker of memory candles fades into a soft haze as you follow a narrow, spiraling path upward, made not of stone, but of something like thought, or forgotten dreams, pressed together until they hold your weight. Up you climb, through veils of mist and fragments of old hymns hummed by no mouths, until you emerge into a space so vast it seems to stretch backward into time. This is the High Roost, the place where Valkyries go when they're done choosing, done sparring, done remembering. A rare sort of silence settles here, soaked with ancient peace. You feel it in your spine first, then your breath. It's not quite a throne room, not quite a garden. Picture long, arching bridges of twilight, suspended between crags, shaped like the wings of sleeping giants. Wind sighs past in lullaby tempo, brushing the edges of massive feathers hung like banners. No gods, no dead, just them. Mainstream historical fact. In Old Norse mythology, the name Valkyrie means chooser of the slain, but their roles evolved over time. By the late medieval period, poems and legends depicted Valkyries as more romantic, ethereal figures, muses, protectors, or even lovers of mortal heroes. Up here, you finally see why. Beneath the iron and bone and battlefield grime, they are something more. They watch not just battles, but everything. Worlds unfolding, empires rising and eating themselves, love stories flickering out in silence. They perch at the edges of what was, eyes glittering with too much history. What do you think we do when we're not collecting dead? One of them murmurs, reclined on a hammock spun from midnight. We watch. We remember the shape of the world and how it keeps breaking differently. You join her. She offers you a small piece of fruit that tastes like honey and lightning. They used to think we were terrifying, she says. War maidens on horseback, monsters in armor, death with braids. You nod. That tracks. But most days, we just sit here. We laugh at thunder. We guess who's going to fall in love next. We make bets on how long before someone tries to invade Iceland again. A few Valkyries chuckle nearby. One's knitting a sweater that could probably withstand a meteor. Quirky tidbit. A rare 13th century text claims Valkyries were sometimes summoned not with prayer, but with fresh loaves of rye bread left outside during eclipses. Scholars mostly ignore this, though one famously baked 30 loaves just in case. He reported 0 Valkyries, but said the bread was excellent. You ask if they get bored. Sometimes, one says, then we do karaoke. You laugh, she doesn't. We have a full set list. Odin does a terrible rendition of Don't Fear the Reaper. You try not to imagine that. Historians still argue whether Valkyries had emotional depth, or were simply divine agents with no inner conflict. Another adds, lounging upside down on an ethereal tree limb. Honestly, we let them argue. It gives them something to do. They stretch wings like thunderclouds, unfurling lazily, and you realize that up here, time barely matters. Eternity is just Tuesday. So what do Valkyries do between battles? They wait, they breathe, they carry the weight of worlds in silence. They sing when no one listens. They keep the sky stitched together with memory. And sometimes they just exist. Not every day is glory and fate. Some days they tend to injured birds. Some days they braid each other's hair and argue over which age of mortals had the best poetry. One day, one Valkyrie sat still for so long that moss started growing on her shoulder. She kept it, named it Trevor. The others still make fun of her. Another Valkyrie gestures for you to follow her, out toward a narrow ledge overlooking what seems to be everything. You sit side by side, legs dangling into clouds. She points at a glimmer in the distance. That's a battle starting. Another. That's a funeral. And then, softer. That's a kiss goodbye. You watch the lights blink on and off like a living constellation. Some think we love war, she says. We don't. Some think we worship death. We don't. What do you worship, you ask? She pauses, then smiles. Courage, grief, the moment someone chooses love anyway, and you get it. This isn't a job, it's a vigil, a long, quiet, sacred watching. Far below, in the realm of the living, another soul takes its first breath. You feel it. The Valkyries stir. Time to go, you ask. Not yet, she says, but soon. There's always a soon. You sit a little longer, side by side, then you rise. And so do they, dozens of them, fanning out like night blooming all at once. They stretch, sigh, shake out their wings, back to battle. Maybe, back to the work of remembering, always. You turn to leave the roost, stepping carefully along the twilight bridge. The wind carries a final whisper behind you. Come back when you forget who you are. We'll help you remember. And maybe they will. And now, softly, slowly, gently, we reach the end. The feathers have settled. The battlefields have gone quiet. The twilight bridges stretch into softness, and the stars hum low lullabies to no one in particular. You feel lighter here, like your bones remember how to float. The candles still flicker in the hall of memory, but their glow no longer demands anything of you, just warmth, just presence. All around you, the Valkyries have folded their wings for now. No armor, no choices to make, no names to record. Only silence that wraps around you like an old blanket from a forgotten childhood, and it fits. The sky above stretches open, not with awe, but with calm. Everything that needs to wait can wait. Everything that was too loud is far away. There is only this moment, this softness, this slow exhale. And if you listen carefully, really carefully, you might still hear the faint flutter of wings above you, watching, not judging, just watching. You're safe now. Let go of the noise. Let go of the story. The Valkyries will keep the watch. You sleep.